Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Simone here. So today I'm going to be filming my May wrap up, and in the month of May I actually read 10 books, which I'm very happy with. I did have a couple of dud books, but other than that I think I had quite a successful reading month and really enjoyed a lot of the books. I also completed the last, I think 2 books, last 2 books in my stand up to the TBR books 11 to 20, so I'll link the video below where I talk about the next ones I'm going to read and also what I thought of those previous books. So that is the 3rd one in my stand up to the TBR videos. But I had a very successful month. I was very happy with what I read, and I'm really excited to hopefully continue on in the same vein. So the first book that I read this month was from my stand up to the TBR, and this is First and Then by Emma Mills. And if you remember when I talked about this in my previous stand up to the TBR video, I really wasn't 100% sure about this book. From the synopsis, it kind of seemed a little bit like it was very contemporary, and I don't really read a lot of contemporary that's not got another element to it, if that makes sense. So this follows a girl named Devon Tennyson who is kind of in love with her best friend Kaz, and he doesn't know about this. And she is trying to deal with the fact that he is kind of dating other girls, and also on top of that, the main focus of this is that her cousin Foster has moved in with them because he has some certain family issues of his own, and so she now has this new person in her life, and it's about that. Now, I was reading this and I was enjoying it. This book is it's the book that slowed me down a bit. I think this is the book that I just wasn't really excited to read to begin with, and so every time I wanted to read I just wasn't really pulling myself to read it. And then I got about halfway through and I started to really enjoy this, and it started to become a much easier read. I think Devon as a character was really endearing. I loved her relationship with Foster, and it was kind of one of those like accidental families that kind of you become family with someone, and you don't know that you need it until it happens. And the relationship in this I thought was really, really sweet, and I loved that. There was a lot of football in this, so I wasn't expecting to like it very much, but actually I really did enjoy that element of it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and I did give it a 3-star. Then the next book I read I talked about in my May favourites video, and it was my favourite book of the month, and that is Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth, who is the author of the Divergent trilogy. I've read the first book in the Divergent trilogy and haven't read any more yet, but I do plan on it. I know a lot of people have problems with Carve the Mark, and I will address those issues because I don't want people to go into this blindly. A lot of people think that this book is racist in some ways. Basically, the main characters of this are Akos, who is from a different side of the planet to Kyra, who is the other main character, and Akos is described, he's from the side of the planet that is more primitive and a bit more rough and kind of not as civilized as Kyra's side of the planet, but he is described as being darker skinned than her. Now, I can understand why people think that this is a kind of blight on race, but to be honest I didn't see that when I was reading it. But then again, I kind of imagined it as being I don't know, I just kind of thought of them as 2 different like groups of people. I don't know, that it didn't enter my mind when I was reading it. It was only afterwards when I was reading reviews that I realised what people's what the problems that people had were. The other thing is that in this world, when you kill somebody, you have to carve the mark into your arm. So you have to literally there is like a ritual where you literally carve a mark into yourself, and people were thinking this was to do with self-harming, and obviously that totally makes sense. And if you have a problem with self-harming, or it's something that triggers you, then I would 100% skip this book. But I have never had any problems with that, or I've never experienced any sort of issues around that, so for me it just wasn't something that came up, and I was thinking of it in kind of a ritualistic way as opposed to a self-harming way. The reason why I liked this book so much is the storyline was just really interesting, and it really kept me hooked. Like I said, this follows Akos, who lives on one side of the planet, and he has the power to stop other people's powers, and Kyra's, she has pain inside of her, which whenever she touches someone, it they are in a lot of pain. She can, and her brother, who is the ruler of that side of the planet now, he uses her as kind of a torture weapon. She obviously doesn't like this, but she also has to deal with the fact that the pain inside of her means that she's constantly in so much pain. And obviously Akos is the only person that can touch her and get rid of her pain and not feel pain himself. And the reason I loved this so much was because the relationship between the two of them was fantastic, and they just seemed to gel together so well, and I don't know, I just really liked this. I think it was one of those books that just kept me hooked. I cannot wait for the second one. I think this is a duology, and I don't know what the second one's called. I don't know if it's got a title yet, but I am really excited to read it and kind of see what happens to the two of them. So I would recommend this book, but like I said, go into it with the knowledge that some people have issues with these two things. The third book I read this month was my next Stephen King book, and as you all know probably, I am reading Stephen King's books and kind of going through them. And yeah, I've read another one that I didn't know. I read The Dead Zone by Stephen King, which I hadn't really heard about much before. My boyfriend couldn't quite believe it because he said it's a really popular film, which I didn't know, so that's me. But this basically is about a man named Johnny who, when he was younger, he had an ice skating accident and banged his head, and so now he had this kind of weird premonition of things that were going to happen sometimes, but never really thought anything of it until he got into a car accident, and he was in a coma for, I believe, 4 weeks. 4 years. He was in a coma for 4 years, and that his fiance has left him for another man, and obviously everything's moved on by 4 years. Anyway, he wakes up from this coma, and when he touches somebody, he can see things that are about to happen or that have happened. And it kind of freaks people out, and then he gets plagued with people sending him things, asking him to find things and whatever. And I really, really liked this one. I didn't love it as much as some of the other Stephen King books I've read. This was definitely not a horror book, so if you really want to read a Stephen King book but you're scared about the horror, this is not horror. This is more of a mystery kind of book, I would say. It isn't scary in the slightest, so don't kind of worry about that if you're going to read it and kind of nervous about that. Like I said, I really liked this. It was very interesting. It basically is, like Stephen King's other books, kind of like a character study. He's amazing at characters and kind of weaving storylines together. I think the only reason why I didn't love this as much was because it was quite heavy on American politics, and I don't really know much about American politics around this time. I think it was I honestly don't even know when it was about. It was very much American politics heavy, and it's just not something that I'm overly interested in, I think. So it did go over my head quite a bit, but as I said, I really liked this. I gave it a 3-star, and I would say if you like Stephen King, then you will like this. Up next, I read Heartless by Marissa Meyer, and I read Cinder by Marissa Meyer a few years ago, and I haven't finished the series, The Lunar Chronicles, but I really need to because I loved this book. I gave this a 4-star. It wasn't quite a 5-star for me, and I'll explain why in a moment, but this basically is the prequel to Alice in Wonderland, and it basically is the story of the Queen of Hearts before she became the Queen of Hearts, and it's how she became that. This was kind of a weird thing for me because it was reading a book knowing that the ending was not going to be a good ending. It wasn't going to be a happy ending because obviously she becomes the Queen of Hearts for some reason. And so it was weird reading this because the beginning of the book, her name's Catherine in this, but at the beginning of the book, Catherine is just a really sweet, lovely person who wants the best for everyone and just loves to bake. And I think that was weird for me because I was reading it thinking, how can this person turn into the Queen of Hearts? But I think that Marissa Meyer did an amazing job with this because really all it did was talk about these events, and I was thinking as I was reading it, of course that would make you completely crazy and want to do something else, and it would make you want to get revenge, and it would, it's just really, really fun. The relationships in this, I loved them. And the ending was heartbreaking, and just, I don't know, but I loved this. This was so much about love and duty and being honour bound, and I just thought it was incredible. The reason why, like I said, I didn't give it completely a 5-star was because the ending was quite abrupt, and I did kind of go, oh, like, I mean, I get it, but it seems a bit much. But no, I loved this. I definitely gave it a 4-star. I would definitely recommend if you have read the Lunar Chronicles and you really liked them, or if you just really like Alice in Wonderland. I do think you need to have read Alice in Wonderland before you read this though, because if you don't know the story of Alice in Wonderland, this will not make sense to you. But I really, really loved this, and yeah, I'm excited to hopefully continue the Cinder, the Lunar Chronicles, because I loved her writing so much in this. The next book I read was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and this is the first book in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series. I don't know how many books are in the series. I've heard so many people talk about this on BookTube. It's one of the big BookTube books that everyone thinks that you should read, and I will agree to an extent. I liked this book. I did give it a 3-star, but I didn't love it, and the reason I didn't love it, I think one, it was probably because it was overhyped for me, but two, and I haven't heard anyone make this comparison before, but I feel like, to me, this really reminded me of Night Film by Marisha Pessl, which I should just say is a completely different story. Like, it's not the story that reminds me, it's the way of the writing. It's the kind of like, basically, this book is about a boy named Daniel who, when he was a child, his father took him to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books and told him that he could take a book from the shelves, any book he wanted, and he picks The Shadow of the Wind, and the book, he reads the book, loves the book, and rereads it over his childhood, and then one day decides that he wants to read more by this author, and then he finds out that somebody in the area is burning all of the author's books, and he then tries to find out what happened to the author, and kind of, he then delves into the author's life and tries to figure out who this person is and why they're trying to burn all the books. And it was fascinating. It is like historical fiction, I guess, and it really was interesting, and I felt like there were so many twists and turns that you just couldn't kind of predict what was going to happen. But the reason why it reminds me of Night Film by Marisha Pessl, which is about a man trying to find out if the alleged suicide of a filmmaker's daughter had anything to do with the filmmaker's life, is because it is that, like, delving into the creator of something's life, and it's kind of done in methodical steps, and there's lots of twists and turns, and I just preferred Night Film. I gave Night Film a 5-star, and I found myself comparing it throughout this, and I really, really, I did love this, but there were parts of it where I just got a little bit, like, not bored, but I found like it was repeating itself, or it was a little bit tedious. I do feel like it did not need to be as long as it was. It's about 550 pages, I think, and I didn't feel like it needed to be that long, but I did enjoy it, and I would recommend you read it, but to me it wasn't quite as good as a lot of people had said. Then I read Bud and Brooks by Thomas Mann, which is about a family who are going through poverty. This book I gave a 1-star. I really didn't like it. I don't really have too much else to say about it. It just wasn't my type of thing. It was kind of biographical in some ways. It was weird, and no, it really didn't like shout out to me to read it anymore. I don't know, I think I said in my library haul that I'll link below that I was trying something completely out of my comfort zone, and I wanted to see if I enjoyed it, and I think that really I know what I'm going to like reading, and sometimes, yes, okay, it's good to go out of your comfort zone, but I think, to be honest, that kind of going out of my comfort zone hasn't worked for me, and so I'm not going to read any more like that. I think I'm just going to, I feel like I know what I'm going to like, and I really need to stick more to that rather than trying to make myself read books that I know I'm not going to enjoy. So yeah, that for me was kind of a bit of a lesson, but yeah, I didn't like this at all. I then read the final book in my sign up to the TBR for books 11 to 20, and this one is The Book of Speculation by Erica Swyler, which I've heard a few people talk about, but I didn't really know anything about it, and I was pleasantly surprised. I did give this book a 3 out of 5 stars. This basically follows, I'm trying to remember his name, follows a man named Simon Watson who lives on the edge of a cliff, basically. He lives in one of those houses that is on the edge of the cliff and is kind of slowly going to fall into the sea. And he is a librarian, and he is one day sent a book by a collector of books who has found a book that has his grandmother's name written inside it, and he then tries to figure out what's going on, and he basically discovers that his ancestors, all the women in his family, all drown on a particular day. I believe it's like July 24th. They always drown on July 24th, and then his younger sister comes home and decides to live with him again, and he's now, and I think this book starts on like the 17th of July, so he has like a week until potentially the same thing's going to happen again, and he is trying to figure it out. This has a lot of circus things in. This was basically what I was hoping Night Circus was going to be, about the circus and the kind of carnival and things. I really hated Night Circus, by the way, if you don't already know. I gave it a 1 star. This one was just really what I wanted. It was really interesting. It was great. It was in 2 different timelines, so one chapter would be Simon and his kind of the present day and kind of figuring out what's going on, and then the opposite chapter would be from this book, and it would be about this circus that was travelling and kind of the things that happened. And yeah, I absolutely loved this. I definitely would recommend it. I think it's really, really interesting, and it kept me hooked the whole way through, and I just also think this is a really beautiful book, so I'm kind of happy that I bought it for the stand up to the TBR, and yeah, I really, really did enjoy this. Up next, I read another book that I really didn't like, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I gave a 2 star. Obviously, everybody knows what Frankenstein is. It's a classic, and I was hoping I was going to love it, but I started to read it and realised that the writing in this is so dry, it's so uninspiring, and I don't really understand what people see in it. I'm going to be honest with you. If you love Frankenstein, please tell me why, because I just couldn't read the writing was just so, there was too many words that didn't mean anything, and I don't know, it was like a typical classic for me, a book that just really is hard to read, and I really did not like it very much. So I did finish it, gave it a 2 star, but to me it didn't have that Frankenstein feel to it. I didn't quite get the storyline ahead of it, like it just didn't really make sense to me, and it really just wasn't what I was expecting. Then I'm very excited that I finally read this book. I can't believe I finally read it, and I'm getting somewhere with this blemmin' series again. This is City of Fallen Angels by Cassandra Clare, and this is the 4th book in the Mortal Instruments series. I finally read it. There are 6 books in this series, and I've been reading this for about 3 years, I think. I read the 3rd one in July last year, and I was like, I need to get on with it. So my plan is to hopefully get the next 2 books read. I would like to say by the end of the year. That's my kind of aim. I can't really go into this too much because obviously it is a spoiler, because it is the 4th book. But this, it follows Clary and Jace, who are both shadow hunters, and they are also in love. And it's about like them trying to protect the demon world, and it's about different things. This one was probably, I did enjoy this a lot. I gave this a 4 star. It's not my favourite of the series. It's probably, it did feel a little bit like a filler book, because at the start of the book it's not that different to the end, if that makes sense. Like, it's quite linear in like it just a short linear is what I should say. It's very much a very short period of time. It doesn't feel like much happened really. I did feel like this was a massive filler between books 3 and books 5, because I feel like book 5 is going to be where all the action happens. So I'll see if I'm right when I read that one, but I did enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. I think that it was a good book, and I was interested in it because I like the characters that are in this. I don't think I was necessarily interested in it for the plot though. And then the final book that I read this month was The Games by James Patterson and Michael Sullivan, and this is part of the Private series. In fact, I think it's book 12. I wasn't really holding out too much hope for this book because, like I said in previous videos, the Private series is kind of like petering off for me. I'm not enjoying the end ones quite as much as I did the earlier ones. I feel like it's gone on for too long now, but I actually didn't mind this book. I gave this one a 3 star, which is kind of like normal for me in James Patterson books now. I think this one was probably quite interesting because of the subject matter of it. This basically is about the Rio Olympics, and it's about the lead up to that, and about these potential terrorists who are trying to ruin the games because they're saying that too much money was spent on the Olympic Stadium rather than on the poor people who live in the favelas, is that what it's called, favelas, in Rio itself. So it was really interesting. I thought the political answers to this was quite interesting, the way that it was being dealt with. I was devastated because somebody died at the end of this. I won't tell you who, but I was really, really sad about it. I thought, because I was like, oh, this is one of my favourite characters, and then I was like, oh, don't get favourite characters because then they'll die. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. Like I said, it's not groundbreaking enough for me to give it more than a 3 stars, but it was really good, and it's kind of given me a slightly more hope for the, I think there's a few more in the series yet, so hopefully they'll get better and better. But yeah, I'm enjoying it at least. It was kind of a book that I enjoyed reading. It just wasn't a book that I would revisit, I don't think. So that is the 10 books that I read in May. I hope that you liked this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and also tell me what your favourite book from May was, because I always need recommendations. I'm really excited for the month of June. I'm actually doing my first 2 buddy reads, which is exciting. And yeah, let me know what you want to see on this channel as well. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye guys!